It seems to me that Trump administration has lost control a little bit. And I don't know what to make of it, but the recent events, suggest that they've been under siege, certainly for a very, very narrow segment of Western leadership. An escalation would be desirable. So they would like to have a more hawkish leadership in Russia, because then they would get their world war, and that would be a Christmas present for them, because their imploding system could possibly be saved by a global World War III scenario. The one I'm really afraid of is a major false flag attack on a major city like London. So long as their system is intact, we are at risk of this future. So at this point, I think that anarchy would be preferable.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Reinvent Money, a podcast about money and power. Today, back on the show, market analyst, author, and former hedge fund manager, Alex Krainer. Hi, Alex. How have you been?
I've been well. Thank you, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Of course, in Europe, so worried about certain things that we're going to discuss today, of course. But yeah, in general, I'm fine. So let's talk about the conflict in Ukraine first. Last time we spoke, we focused primarily on the Middle East, of course, another hot zone. But let's talk first about Ukraine today. In the alternative media, I hear people like yourself, but also Douglas McGregor and the guys from the Duran for some time now saying that the front line is collapsing. Yet the Ukrainians, despite having a shortage of troops and arms, seem to provide more resistance than expected. So how do you see this conflict evolve for the rest of the year?
It seems to me that we're at the last hurrah stage. And I think that most of this last hurrah is taking place in the propaganda domain. I've noticed that over the last few weeks, there's been a crescendo of pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian propaganda, which has a few dimensions. One of them is Russia bad. The other one is Ukraine, heroic freedom fighters. Ukraine's winning, Russia is losing. Russia's economy is about to implode. All this kind of stuff. And it's much, much more intense than I've noticed over the last 3 years. And this is a little bit typical of proxy wars, because the parties that are actually the war instigators can't join the war in a real way. NATO troops are not going to go into Ukraine, not in any meaningful at any meaningful scale. So they've organized propaganda campaigns that go through the media, through the social media, and this is what we see. And I think it's an added sign of panic because it seems that the Russians appear to be gaining 10 to 20 square kilometers on a daily basis. It seems that the Ukrainian defenses are collapsing at an accelerating rate. Zelensky is rushing off to New York for an urgent meeting with Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump has made it very clear that he's not joining the war. He's not going to provide a security guarantee to Ukraine. So it seems to me that the war party is grasping at straws, but they cannot give up. So this is where we're at. I think it would be thankless to try to predict when all this ends, because as you rightly said, the Ukrainians are proving themselves to be more resilient than anybody expected. But the country is weakened, their military is weakened. They no longer have the support of the United States. The arms shipments have thinned out. Their air defenses are practically gone. Their air force is almost gone. And so we're down to the Russians mopping up the infantry and clearing out the trenches. And so there's only so long that they can hold out, because it's a matter of encircling them and mopping them out methodically, place after place.
And that's usually the phase in any war that you will see most casualties then, I guess.
Yeah, and well, yes, exactly. And so over the last few months, we've had absolutely staggering casualty numbers.
Yeah, and one thing I do read often is that Ukraine has a large drone production capacity, and Russia as well. So both the countries they allegedly produce millions of drones, and the West's only hundreds of thousands combined. Also, Ukraine is going to introduce soon their Flamingo ballistic missile. We've seen already a few more attacks from Ukraine on Russian oil refinery capacity. Do you think that could make a difference in the conflict? Ukraine being able to hit Russia deeper without the assistance of or without the need for Western weapons?
No, it will not make any strategic difference. It'll make a difference in the sense of enabling Ukrainians to get lucky here and there and blow things up. And they've proven themselves quite capable and effective in this sense. Don't forget, they have a very, very extensive help from the British and other NATO nations in coordinating and targeting these drone attacks. Flamingo, I don't know about that. It seems to me that it's a bit overhyped. The whole thing is overhyped. Like, they're trying to make it sound like it's the next Wunderwaffe, the next wonder weapon that's going to turn everything around. But you can't win the war by blowing things up. This would be like watching a fight between Mike Tyson and some high school kid, and maybe the high school kid is tough and manages to throw a few punches and make some scratches and bruises on Mike Tyson's face and body, but he's not going to win the battle. He's not going to win the match. So
No.
I think you need combined arms operations, because blowing things up is one thing. Actually defeating the enemy, taking control of the battlefield, turning it around in your favor, that's a complete category difference from what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve. I think that in the West, the Western mindset is focused on damaging Russia, and in that case, in that sense, they're doing a job that's moderately effective, without any concern as to what cost Ukraine sustains to do this. And I think that the hope is that if you can continue this long enough, that maybe a miracle might happen somewhere along the way, that maybe Vladimir Putin dies, or he gets killed, or for some reason you find an opening, a chink in the armor that allows you to overthrow Vladimir Putin's government, because this is the whole game, the regime change in Russia. And so you keep the fight going at all costs. That's the West's game. But there's no chance that Ukraine can, at the strategic level, turn this war around in their favor.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that's also a really dangerous gamble anyway of the West. If you achieve regime change, as in Putin comes to die or is overtaken by someone else, most likely that person will be more hawkish even than Putin is.
Yeah, that's very likely the case. But groupthink is a very, very powerful thing, and I think that the Western leadership collectively have been gripped by groupthink and a psychosis, and they're blinded with this goal without really considering the possible consequences, and especially unintended consequences that might come from out of this. Certainly, for a very, very narrow segment of Western leadership, an escalation would be desirable. So they would like to have a more hawkish leadership in Russia, because then they would get their world war, and that would be a Christmas present for them, because their imploding system could possibly be saved by a global World War III scenario.
Yeah,
Because
I
yeah,
agree with that. I mean, if I, of course, like you, I'm based in Europe, and I just see the awful financial state of countries like France, for example, or the UK. Then we have the deindustrialization of Germany, but also in the Netherlands, you see a lot of popular uprisings on the street. In London this weekend, also in Holland, we see, of course, in France, regular protests. So I think a lot of European people want a course change. They want the leaders to focus on what's happening within their own borders instead of Project Brussels. So, for European leaders, for Brussels, they need something, of course, to unite the people behind, and something like climate change is much less tangible and I would say effective than a potential war, for example, is. So my fear is just like you, is that they are going to push for an escalation in order to sort of save Europe, but I think it will only make Europe worse off in the end.
yes, correct. I think that Europe is in a terrible position. The current leadership has bet the ranch on Project Ukraine, uh, which was preceded by the pandemic. Let's not forget, which was preceded by heavy commitment to what shall we call them, net zero policy, all exacerbated by tens of millions of migrants that have overflowed the European nations. So it's almost a perfect storm, which hasn't yet had its full effect, because we're only now seeing strong reactions on the streets of Europe, particularly Great Britain, now France as well. Uh, Germany is not far from a social revolt, and I think that everything might kind of blow up this fall and winter. And of course, in these situations, the ruling establishments for centuries would cry barbarians at the gates in order to misdirect the legitimate grievances of people to an external enemy, to recruit the fighting age males to the war effort, to send them off to the front so they get slaughtered in very large numbers, because this is, this demographic, the military aged men are exactly the greatest threat to the ruling establishments. And so you desperately need an external enemy, and then you need a credible pretext for war against that external enemy. So
Yeah.
we are seeing all that, with they're really desperately trying to get something going. They tried with Ursula von der Leyen's plane, almost crashed because the Russians interfere with their GPS positioning. And then we had the styrofoam drones that landed in Poland, which was obviously not an attack by Russia, because who attacks with styrofoam drones with no weapons on them? And then we had Estonia claim that Russian jets have flown through its airspace, and it's just one thing after another. But what I find very surprising is that it's so patently obvious that it's not even causing this galvanization of like an emotional reaction among the European people, that they say like, oh my God, we're getting attacked by the Russian, we all have to go to war. It's almost transparent that these are all lousy, flimsy, poorly planned false flag attacks. The one I'm really afraid of is a major false flag attack on a major city like London, because one of the things that I've noticed already last September is that all the webcams in the city of London went dark all at once, all of a sudden. There's a handful of them that are still active, but literally hundreds of them just went dark, and they have been dark ever since.
When
That
was that? Since
that was
when?
last September. that was last September, that they all went dark. And if you look up, there's a few sites that show London webcams. They're all dark. And then, some people found, I think, one or two or three that are still, like, one of them is on the, not Wembley Road, what do you call it, that famous street where the Beatles took a photograph, Abbey Road.
Abbey Road, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mean like all the CCTV? They've been most of them have been disabled since September.
Yes, correct.
look
Well,
it up,
the ones
yeah.
that are publicly available,
Yeah. Reminds me a bit of the plane crash in 9/11 in Washington, where there was also no footage available.
Well, yeah, but they had to go around and collect that footage. The I don't know, CIA or FBI or security agencies, whichever ones, they had to go to those places and collect the footage and take it away. And, maybe the deep state learned something from that, so they decided to switch them all off preemptively. I don't know. There's no, it would be very difficult to come up with a benevolent explanation for why that happened or how. How was never explained. It was never even addressed. It's kind of a major thing, these webcams have been on for many, many years. And, if you wanted to take a look at some location in London, you could go to the webcam and check it out. Now you no longer can. And London is supposed to be one of the premier global metropolises. So that's really, really weird.
I will look it up. And government hasn't given any explanation. The London mayor, for example.
Nothing coherent. I'm not aware of any coherent explanation. I'm aware of discussions where somebody claimed that somebody explained something, but it's been a year. They've not been put back into operation.
And what about the theory that Russia indeed would be willing to send drones and fighter jets into NATO airspace just to test out NATO response times and everything? It kind of makes sense from a Russian point of view too, to kind of test the Western's defenses in that sense.
Yeah, with a lot of imagination, yes. But, Russia would be interested in doing that if they wanted to actually attack NATO countries. And that would be about as dumb of a move as could be possibly imagined. Why would they do that? So I don't buy. And then, dealing with NATO equipment, they have 3 years experience in Ukraine. So why would they need to of all places go poke at Estonia and Poland? And then, if you actually wanted to do that, then you would send probably a real drone, like a surveillance drone, rather than a styrofoam decoy, which is, it's just a dummy to draw anti-aircraft fire. It doesn't do anything. So why would you do it exactly with those styrofoam drones? And then, from the images they presented about those drones, it seems that they've been kind of scotched together by somebody. They didn't come out of a factory. So I think a likely explanation is that these, because these are very light gliding vehicles. They landed somewhere in Ukraine, sustained minimal damage. The Ukrainians collected them, patched them up, and then sent them over to Poland to create a provocation, because, Ukrainians do have very strong reasons to do something like this, because their only hope of staying alive, as a country, is to trigger a NATO response against Russia, Article 5 kind of response. And so, like as they did 3 years ago in Poland, when they launched, or 2 years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, they launched 2 missiles into Poland, which those ones actually killed, I think, 2 or 3 Polish farmers. But again, it was the whole propaganda machinery got into hyperdrive to say, like, oh, the Russians are attacking, and it turned out that it was not Russian attack, that it was a Ukrainian attack. And that it was calculated as a provocation to escalate the war to a general war between NATO and Russia.
Yeah, but that kind of worries me, because I remember, was it like 10 years ago when Turkey by accident shot down a Russian fighter jet, and then of course that led to a lot of diplomatic issues, and I think also some sanction from Russia to Turkey, and then Turkey said sorry, and then everything was good again. But I mean, something like that could happen again, and what would be the consequence of that? So let's say it doesn't even matter, I guess, whether the fighter jet entered Estonian or Romanian airspace or whatever, but if the West thinks so and they shoot down a Russian jet, I mean, what would be Putin's response to something like that?
Well, it would probably be similar to his response to Turkey shooting down his jet. Unless it was sustained and repeated multiple times. Turkey shooting down Russian jet was not accidental; it was deliberate. Erdogan signed off on that. It was a deliberate attempt to provoke a conflict between Turkey and Russia, and the Russians reacted by sanctioning the Turks. And in the end, Erdogan had to go and fly over to Moscow, where he asked for a meeting with Putin, and Putin kept him waiting 4 or 5 hours. And then they patched it up, and I guess Erdogan must have said, "We're not going to do that again. Sorry about that." And that was the end of it. And so that's how do you call it? That's the responsible way to deal with it, because you minimize the damage on everybody. Because, Russia could have retaliated, and then you have an escalation cascade, which ends up following the original incident with many more that end up causing a lot more damage and a lot more casualties on both sides. The problem with Europe today is that the people who are in charge in Poland, in Estonia, in Baltic states in general, in Romania, are for some reason are very keen on escalating the war. When the 13 drones from Russia, that is, 13 Russian drones from wherever they came from, landed in Poland, the Russians repeatedly asked the Polish side for a discussion and an investigation. And the Poles were not even slightly interested. If you wanted to minimize damage and if you wanted to avoid a major escalation, which would cost your country very dearly, like if you got the war escalation, that would be a disaster, not only for Russia, but also for Poland. Then you would be very interested in talking to the other side, as Erdogan did talk with Putin in the aftermath of them shooting a Russian aircraft. But the Poles showed absolutely no interest, no inclination whatsoever to de-escalate. So the only game was, let's try to get the war going. Fortunately, I think that the Polish people didn't buy into it. I think that it was so unconvincing that hundreds or maybe thousands of Polish social media accounts started poking fun at it, because it was obviously that ridiculous.
But it's interesting because Poland also doesn't have a financial incentive or economic incentive to go to war. I get it in the west of Europe, given especially like France or UK, given the abysmal government finances and also the desire to federate Europe. But Poland is a very strong nation. They're flourishing economically. They're growing fast. They have no incentive to go to war with Russia, right? So I don't get it why they are still so much anti-Russia.
Well, no, nobody has. Well, 99.99% of people don't have an incentive to go to war.
Because talking about the leaders, basically the government or
the leaders.
Yeah, the leaders.
The leaders have different incentives. You have to give you an example. Radek Sikorski, he's through and through a British agent. He is, he took on British citizenship before he came back to Poland. He studied at Oxford. He was a member of the very, very exclusive Bullingdon Club by invitation only. He was invited to the Bullingdon Club by none other than Boris Johnson. Other alumni of the Bullingdon Club are people like David Cameron, Nathan Rothschild, George Osborne, practically the creme de la creme of the British establishment. He only changed back to Polish nationality when he was sent back to Poland to take charge. And then his political career as a 20-something took off like a rocket. And he very quickly became the foreign minister. Then he became, I think, the defense minister. And then he went to be an MEP. And then he became a foreign minister again. And he is the foreign minister now. And he's busy, along with his wife, Anne Applebaum, fulminating against Russia practically nonstop. But, what does he have in common with the ordinary Polish people? That's not the CV of an ordinary Polish person who has nothing to do with the City of London. And then in the City of London, in London, in that 10 Downing Street, you have Keir Starmer, who is, a faceless person who is basically the minion of Tony Blair, who is Mr. City of London. He's the knight companion of the most noble order of the Garter, of the highest order of nobility of the City of London. And then you have in Germany, you have Friedrich Merz, former head of the BlackRock in Germany. Then you have the Rothschild banker Emmanuel Macron in Paris. And then in the European Union, you have Ursula von der Leyen, who is who is told every day what to do by George Soros and so forth. So these people have very different incentives, and their incentives are related to Europe's banking interests. And Europe's banking interests are desperate to get their hands on Russia's natural resource wealth, which is estimated at least $75 trillion up to $90 trillion. Well, if you got control of that collateral, that would be a major boost to their banks, because they could use it to extend a lot of loans to their clients, more multinational corporations like Exxon and Halliburton and BP and Shell and so forth, to go and develop Russia. And then, by virtue of that, Russian natural resources become assets on the books of Western banks. And so people like Starmer and Macron and von der Leyen and Friedrich Merz and what's his face in Poland, Radek Sikorski, they're all servants of that system. And they will be rewarded for this. Like Tony Blair, after serving up Iraq War in 2003, when he was done with his premiership in the UK, he went on to JP Morgan, where he got an advisory job for £5 million or dollars per year. So they all get rewarded very handsomely, and they don't care what it costs the ordinary Polish person, the ordinary German person, the ordinary French or British person. They don't care at all. This is their constituencies, and this is who they're loyal to.
I remember Sikorsky also thanking the US after the Nord Stream attack on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
And if we zoom back in on Europe, if France indeed, I just don't see a solution for France. What's going to happen with France, and how is the eurozone going to paper that problem over?
I don't think eurozone is going to paper that problem. I think they're going to paper over it. Paper as in printing money. Yeah. That's the only thing that they can do, because if you wanted to deleverage your economy by introducing austerity, cutting government spending, increasing taxes, doing things like this, if you treated your country like a business or like a household, you would very quickly cause a sharp depression in the eurozone, and that is politically very, very difficult, because you end up paying the price, because immediately you would have a social uprising. The other alternative is to simply keep printing the money, keep flooding the system with liquidity to keep it from seizing up. And then the ultimate the ultimate outcome of that is an acceleration of price inflation in the eurozone, and we're going to see that. We're going to see that in Europe. We're going to see that in the UK. For sure, we're going to see that in the United States ultimately as well. But maybe the United States has a different kinds of maneuvering space than the UK does and that the Europeans do. And to the political establishment, this gives them time. It allows them to, let's say, go through the unraveling in a more gradual manner. And then, hopefully in that time, they can finagle something. They can maybe stage a false flag attack or invent a new pandemic. In her last State of the European Union speech at the European Parliament, which was just a few weeks ago, Ursula von der Leyen was talking about that we are on a verge, if not already in the beginning, of a new health emergency. So she was talking about some kind of a new health emergency, even though she didn't specify what health emergency that was. Are we in a pandemic? Should we all isolate? Should we all lock down? Should we wear masks again? She left it at that. But basically what it tells you is that they're thinking about contingencies. Okay, if we can't get a war with Russia going, then we have to go with lockdowns. We have to go with some kind of a psychosis and fear against our people so that they don't rise up against us.
Yeah, I can imagine as a third trick they can pull up their sleeve is just saying that if we don't come together, if we don't federalize, the euro will fall. Dutch people, they will lose most of their pensions. Banks will go bankrupt. Misery will follow for most of Europe. So that's why we need to stick together and actually integrate even more. Because the alternative is complete mayhem and chaos. And that could also be strong enough for people to buy a political union.
It would be mayhem and chaos for them. It would be a mayhem and chaos for their system of governance and for their control of the levers of power that they have in society. It wouldn't be so for the people because, it would be rough in a transition, but generally, so long as people go to work, so long as farmers farm the land, society is resilient and it can go on. And people find walkarounds and they can patch up. So it's for the people, it would maybe be even liberating to an extent, to be free from all the strictures of, I have to do this and I have to do that and I can't do that. Suddenly, your economy spills over into gray and black markets because you have to. Because people maybe who produce food, they have it. They need to give it to the people who need food. They need something in exchange, fuel, other things. And so people find other ways of exchanging goods and services among themselves rather than going through the structures of the establishments and through the financial institutions that we have now. So they adapt relatively quickly. But if that happens, if a significant chunk of your domestic economy spills over into black and gray markets, then it's extremely difficult to get that back and to gain control over it. And not only that, but once that happened, then all of the business, all the transactions that happen in black markets, the government can no longer tax. They have no control over it. And so the tax receipts of the government collapse. And so there you get a possibility of a complete, how do you call it?
Reset.
yeah, exactly. A complete reset of the governing structures.
Yeah, but it could also, I totally see what you're saying, and I also see the potential of that. But it could also lead to very dramatic outcomes, not just temporarily, but maybe also in the long run. If you have this kind of anarchy, perhaps in the markets. And I mean, I'm a libertarian, so I'm very much in favor of markets, but I also see some downsides here. It could be an experiment with very dire consequences as well.
Well, but I think that we already are in very dramatic outcomes, because they're actively destroying farming. They are preparing to usher the digital euro. They're bringing the digital IDs. If you read policy papers like Absolute Zero that was published a few years ago by 7 of the leading British universities, you see that they intend to do away with air travel. They're preparing to do away with the consumption of red meat, so no more lamb, no more beef. They're preparing to shut us into 15-minute cities. They're preparing to clear the land of people and to rewild massive territories of our nations and squeeze people into these megalopolis kind of cities, consisting of many of these small open air prisons, I guess. So long as their system is intact, we are at risk of this future. So at this point, I think that anarchy would be preferable. And then, anarchy is never anarchy. Historically, anarchy is not what you might imagine from Hollywood movies, that people go around slaughtering each other willy-nilly just for no reason whatsoever. That's the Hobbesian and Malthusian philosophies that see human beings as something horrible unless we're ruled over by some kind of a benevolent authority, right? To limit our evil spirits. This is not correct. I think that people are cooperative primarily. And when they realize that they get no use and no help from the government structures, they simply adapt and create their own, from the grassroots, from the bottom up. And usually in these cases, you get greater peace, greater freedom, greater serenity, better neighborhoods, more prosperous living, and so forth. The transition obviously is rough because you go from something to nothing. You have to reinvent the system. But this happens very quickly, in fact.
Yeah, I think anarchy comes from the Greek anargos, right? Without rulers.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's not necessarily bad,
No, I mean, you need rules, but you don't need rulers in a way. Like it's if we and also if you look at the foundation of the European Union, it was supposed to be about subsidiarity, right? You have to do as much as you can locally, but that has completely been thrown overboard. That's the cynical thing.
Yeah, it has been deliberately eviscerated. It started from a good idea, and it drew good intentions by, leading politicians from Germany, Italy, France. And it was moving in the direction of making Europe a prosperous zone that traded with the rest of the world and helped the rest of the world develop, uplift from poverty. I think that the initial intentions were very similar to what China is doing today in the global south. But it was actively and deliberately sabotaged by the Anglo-American elites who actually went as far as assassinating the major leaders of these movements, like Adenauer, there were 2 German bankers who were assassinated, one in the 50s or in the 60s. Then there was Alfred Herrhausen, who was assassinated in 1989 as the Berlin, I think days after Berlin Wall fell, maybe a day after the Berlin Wall fell, because this is the idea he had. He thought, okay, Europe should use its capital to help Eastern European countries and Russia develop and we will exchange our technology with them for their resources, and it will be a mutually beneficial exchange to lift up the whole zone from Lisbon to the Urals. That was the thinking. He was assassinated. Enrico Mattei, who was earlier in the 40s and 50s and 60s, not 60s. He was assassinated, I think, in 1958, maybe, or something like that. But he, pushed very hard for Italian homegrown endogenous development of the whole energy network. Oil trade, oil production, distribution, electrification of the continent, and so on. He was very successful and very effective. And they tried to stop him in a number of ways. They tried to get him to give up and cede, the market to the British and American oil companies. He wouldn't, and so they killed him.
In that light, do you also question the recent deaths of many AfD politicians in Germany?
That wouldn't surprise me if that was a part of it, because this really is, as we've been told, a clash between two systems of governance. And it's not really two systems of governance. It's one system of governance against everybody else. And that one system is the neocolonialist imperial system that's controlled by the European money lending oligarchies, with obviously, with satellites on Wall Street and in Tokyo and Paris and Frankfurt and Zurich and so forth. But I think that the headquarters still is the city of London.
And these oligarchies would lose massively should the euro and the eurozone and the European Union break apart.
They would, but I think that they would lose a lot more if the dollar collapsed, because it seems to me that I was for a very long time, I've been puzzled about their source of power. How can they be this powerful? And I couldn't quite work it out. But it seems to me that they control the petrodollar market. They have controlled petrol, because as I said, I believe that the headquarters of that whole establishment is the city of London, and their host nation is Great Britain. But Great Britain is not a shadow of what it used to be. It barely has an army. It doesn't really have a navy. It's negligible. It has special service forces. It has extensive diplomacy. It has probably one of the world's most powerful and most effective intelligence agencies. And then it has a lot of NGOs everywhere around the world. It has these private contractors and charities that always get involved in their target nations. But, that costs a lot of money. Where is that coming from? And it seems to me that it's coming from their control of the petrodollar market, which is predominantly controlled by London and by the city of London, and by, I think it's sloshing around their spider's web of offshore jurisdictions, like UAE, like the Caribbean jurisdictions, BVI, Cayman Islands, and so forth. And this is US dollars, supposedly, except they don't circulate in the United States. And they are not controlled by US monetary authorities. They are controlled by offshore monetary authorities, which are in London.
Yeah.
And sorry, another thing about that. I didn't realize this, but I just heard that a few days ago in an interview with Alistair MacLeod, who said that the size of this petrodollar market is $10 trillion. 10 trillion, which is then bigger than the US circulation, because the US monetary base is about 6 trillion.
Yeah. So when you say petrodollar, you mean like the eurodollar market, right? The offshore dollar market.
Well, yeah. I think it's largely it overlaps.
Right.
It's basically the same thing, except that petrodollar is the original term that refers to the dollars used for global oil trade, And I guess eurodollar is a better term because it's not just oil. It's a lot of things. Most of global trade is settled in dollars, and most of those dollars aren't even circulated, aren't part of the American domestic financial system.
Yeah, so that's the main tool the European oligarchies are using. I think your friend Tom Luongo also says that that's Trump's plan to sever the link between the euro dollar and the actual dollar and to gain back control and to isolate the dollar in that sense from what's going on in Europe and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's the early impressions I've got from out of Trump administration, that was their intention. But I don't know if, it seems to me that Trump administration has lost control a little bit. And I don't know what to make of it, but the recent events, suggest that they've been under siege. I don't know how to explain this. Some people say that it's the British who are back in control of the White House. Others say that it's the Zionists who have overrun the administration. Maybe it's the impression that we get from the United States, but that impression is real. So I don't know what happens from here on out. It seems to me that Trump administration has lost direction. That they've lost their mojo that was clearly there in the first few months. And now I don't know if this is some kind of an elaborate deception where Trump went to London for the second state visit, and he gave a gushing speech during the reception with King Charles, which was very surprising to me, because the United States has fought their war of independence against Great Britain, and the war of 1812 against Great Britain, and the Civil War was again the war of the Union against the South, which was sponsored by London and Paris. So to go there and to basically bow down to the crown was a very big surprise to me. Now, some people say like, oh yeah, he's, that's all deliberate because, Trump is, how do you call it? Putting them off their guard, maybe. But
Yeah, last time you said he's of course a master in the game of deception, so you never really know with Trump.
Exactly, but well, by this point, I'm deceived myself. I used to say I'm 51-49 in favor of Trump. Now I'm 50-50. I really don't know.
Right, because I have a lot of American viewers. I would like to get your view though on it's difficult to gauge and it's very muddy. But what do you expect to happen in the US next and going forward? Because there's a lot of tension there after the assassination of Kirk. Do you think we're going towards some sort of civil war there, or is that overblown?
I don't really expect a civil war, but I do expect the rise of authoritarianism from out of Trump administration. And I think that Trump will inevitably have to bend to the will of the American public. And something is changing in the mindset of the American public. I think it began already with the pandemic, because so many, I used to live in the United States, and American people are, they're good, hardworking people. They follow the rules, they obey the laws, and so on. Majority, the ordinary American. And I think that for many, many of them, probably a whole significant percentage of the society, the pandemic was a wake up call, and many of them realized something's not right about this story. And so now you already have a doubt, and I think that this is part of the reason why they voted for Trump. I think that the genocide in Gaza is the next level that's hitting, the emotional side. And I think that Charlie Kirk's assassination has now galvanized the Americans in a very powerful way. And you see very intense, very emotional debates about this. It's very hard to unsee and unhear everything that's going on. And so I think that it's creating some kind of a new movement in the American psyche that is different than anything we've seen since World War II. And it's hard to say where it goes, but I think it's moving away from, I think it's reinforcing the American need to go back to their Republican roots, to reverse the imperial overreach. So I think that's happening. I think that Trump will have to bend to this. And I think that there's going to have to be extensive political purges in their system. And I think that this is impossible to do unless you reach a certain authoritarian level of governance. And this we already see. We already saw this under Lincoln, because Lincoln found himself, when he was faced with the Civil War, and enemies not just in the South, but enemies at home, because Wall Street already then was infiltrated in a major way, and the governance structures of the United States were already infiltrated by the agents of the British Empire. Lincoln had to round up something like 10,000 people, if not more, maybe 20,000 people, and run them through military kangaroo courts and imprison them. And I think that a lot of them got executed as traitors. And this was done under Lincoln. I think that Trump administration might be forced to do something like that. Probably they'll do it in a subtler, cleverer way, but something like that is coming. Or else, unless if that doesn't happen, then we have the continuity of the imperial governance. Trying to colonize the world, trying to take over the countries, trying to subjugate them into being your vassals, being your colonies, and continuing with the imperial overreach. And that, reliably leads countries to ruin, as it did every empire in history.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I hope that the country will heal, because I was very struck, and I thought it was very hopeful that Kirk's widow was willing to forgive the perpetrator. And of course, we can have a whole episode about who killed him and what were the motives and everything. But I found it very hopeful that she had the courage to forgive him, and I think that's the spirit we need, not only in the United States but also across the world. So
entirely, I entirely agree, because if you're a Christian, then you're a follower of Christ, and in that case you have to forgive, and probably especially when it's difficult to forgive. But that's not the same to say that you have to let yourself be enslaved.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much, Alex. Very thoughtful and inspiring as always. Where can people find more about your work?
So I have three main platforms. One of them is called iSystem Trend Compass, which is a daily trend following newsletters for traders and investors on Substack. I also have a personal Substack, where I publish less regularly, but maybe more thoroughly researched and more refined articles. And then I'm also active on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie.
Perfect. I'll put everything in the show notes. And thanks for your time again today. And hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Brilliant. Always with pleasure, Paul. Thank you for having me, and greetings to your audience.
Thanks, Alex.
Take care.